Welcome back from the break. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on this special telecast on NewsX. Before the break, we had guests joining us from all across the world, talking, of course, about the Tiananmen Square anniversary, its significance, but also how China has continued its oppressive policies. Dr. Chen, Mr. Togochog, Mr. Ilchi, Ms. Dolkar, and Mr. Biao continue to be with us. But we also have joining us at this point Ambassador Veena Sikri. She's former diplomat. She's in fact also been former Consul General of India in Hong Kong from 96 to 2000. We also have Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli, foreign policy analyst and China expert, joining us live. Welcome to both of you as well. Ambassador Sikri, let me begin with you first. Your thoughts on, of course, the Tiananmen Square anniversary today. What is the significance of the place in '89? Has China changed its policies? And do you believe that China is facing its toughest crisis to date in 2021 with this possibility of a seven-front war against the CCP?
Well, I think that this anniversary of Tiananmen Square is a very special one. And I recall so well from my days in Hong Kong, and I was there in 1997 when Hong Kong was actually handed over to China, that this was always part of the special freedoms that Hong Kong enjoyed. And it was so special, the observation of this anniversary every year, very solemn in Victoria Park. Hundreds of thousands of people used to turn up for it. And it was a symbol of China having recognized one country, two systems. China having accepted the basic law, which was the mini constitution of Hong Kong, which gave these special privileges to Hong Kong, and China's commitment to observe these privileges for 50 years. So this was what the people of Hong Kong had been expecting: a free judiciary, a free press, freedom of assembly, and their special privileges, free media and so on. Now, over the years, this had been coming under threat. And in 2019, which was actually the 30th anniversary of the of Tiananmen Square, so that was the time when China decided to act and bring in a new extradition law, and that led to a huge amount of protest because it was a direct infringement on the freedom of the judiciary, and it meant that people could be taken to China for trial. Now, I think that this was kind of the last straw on the camel's back. It really led to a huge amount of disruption and disturbances by the people. They were fighting for their rights. It was firmly squashed, and in June 2020, you had the imposition of the National Security Law on Hong Kong, which came in last year, and that has severely curtailed the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong. I think what it says for China is as important as what it says for Hong Kong, because China had committed internationally in a signed document that it would observe this one country, two system for 50 years. And it did not observe that even for half of that. This law adopted last year was like, the 23rd anniversary of the handover. So I think this said a lot. It was a big blow to many people in China who were expecting more democratic rights, thinking that the example of Hong Kong would give China more democratic rights. But it didn't work that way. It worked the other way. And in fact, it curtailed severely the rights that the people of Hong Kong enjoyed for the first 2 decades. And now, on the 32nd anniversary of Tiananmen Square, in Hong Kong, even the right to observe the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, a special right given to the people of Hong Kong, because nowhere else in China was the anniversary of Tiananmen Square observed. Even this right seems to be under threat, and today Victoria Park is closed. The leaders of the Hong Kong Democratic Alliance are under arrest. I think one of their last leaders outside was arrested this morning. Yes. And it's been a very sad day for the people of Hong Kong. But they've said, we are going to observe it individually. We're going to light candles in our home. And we've seen that, it affected the way of life in Hong Kong. Yeah. I think it's going to affect Hong Kong's status as a international business center as well. Yeah. Because the June 2020 law says clearly that it applies to people who are not citizens, people who are living in Hong Kong, who are non-permanent residents. It applies to them. And you've seen that even members of the judiciary, like there's a president of the Supreme Court of UK, yes, was a member of the judiciary, and she has now decided to go back. So it is a very sad day, and I think that it impacts severely on China's commitments and
Okay.
the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong.
Okay, let me get Dr. Kondapalli at this point. Dr. Kondapalli, has the attitude of the Chinese not really changed in terms of their determination to crush dissent from 1989 all the way to 2021? Dr. Kondapalli, also, do you believe that this is perhaps the toughest situation that the Chinese have faced in very long, with now the people saying enough is enough, with these rebellions in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang? Can the Chinese handle it? And will the public of China this time say also enough is enough?
Well, when the Tiananmen Square incident took place in 1989, that was a cataclysmic development because the Soviet Union was disintegrating. East European Soviet republics were disintegrating. Ceausescu was executed after he ordered the firing on the demonstrators. While the Tiananmen Square students, peasants, citizens, workers, they have had a lot of differences, for example, between Liu Xiaobo and other leaders in terms of whether to continue the protests, even after the tanks were rolling. It was cataclysmic for the Communist Party as well as for the people, because 1989, later on, the Communist Party sold the idea that stability, prosperity, reforms, and opposing bourgeois liberalism, as Deng Xiaoping mentioned, those are the cornerstones. But we have had also the other cataclysmic developments, such as the Jasmine Revolution, where 4 or 5 people who were gathering in Tiananmen Square were rounded up by the police and near Wang Fuqing area in Beijing, closer to the Beijing hotel, they have been rounded up and nothing really happened. There are other developments in terms of the social credit system, the surveillance, massive surveillance. Some Uyghurs blasted a few years ago in the Tiananmen Square. The SUV they were traveling, they had this blow up in Tiananmen Square, as you mentioned about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So that was another incident. But there are also the Falun Gong activists who have unfolded the flags and conducted these, exercises, Qigong exercises, so there were a number of events which the Chinese Communist Party now today wants to suppress completely by surveillance systems, by social credit systems, by a watching neighborhood watch system, which used to be a Qing dynasty event phenomena. They have the Pao Chia system revived and scrutiny of everybody who is passing through. So this is one set of challenges. The second set is obviously the Chinese youth, Chinese younger people are dissatisfied, partly because the growth rates that were promised in Tiananmen Square have now come down to an officially estimated 2.3% last year. In general, from 10% to about 6% 2 years ago to 2.3%. So the Communist Party's promise that they will maintain prosperity has also gone away. And today, China is the third largest in terms of the protests globally in the streets, on the social welfare benefits being withdrawn, like the pensions, like educational tuition fee, or subsidized housing, or healthcare related issues. So as a result of this, there is a pent-up feeling within the society. Number one. Number two, there is also the issues related to social security that has also been withdrawn, and so there are more number of people coming onto the streets. According to the Tsinghua University estimate, there are 256,000 protests in China, and majority of them are led by the urban people as well as by the peasantry. So this means that China is on a powder keg.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, in different parts of China as well as in the peripheries.
Yeah.
So that results in a phenomena where China cannot cope up with this. And what China is doing is to increase the budget of the PAPF, People's Armed Police Force. In fact, today, People's Armed Police Force is the only major recruiter in terms of employment in China.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Biao at this point once again. And Mr. Biao, have you seen, because you're a Chinese human rights lawyer, have you seen over the years your clients and the human rights violations cases decrease over time or actually increase? And what is the world really doing about this, Mr. Biao?
Actually, roughly speaking, in Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era, we developed a so-called 维权运动, the rights defense movement, and some lawyers and human rights activists joined this human rights movement, and later we have a New Citizens movement and Liu Xiaobo's Charter 08 movement. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party remains the one-party rule, and there's no judicial independence. But we tried our best to push forward rule of law in China, and we did have some achievement regarding rule of law and the human rights movement. But now, when Xi Jinping came to power, he decided to wipe out all the civil society efforts and the resistance. So and one thing is almost all the human rights lawyers have been targeted. One thing people may know is the 709 crackdown in 2015. More than 320 human rights lawyers were arrested or disappeared, and some of them are still in prison. So rule of law now, we never had rule of law since 1949, but during Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era, there was a little bit hope. Now the hope was crossed.
Okay, Ms. Dolkar, do you believe it's time now in this post-COVID world for a renewed push to the Tibetan movement, to the Tibetan cause, and the other freedom movements that are, of course, continuing in China? Do you believe that with this change in global sentiment, your cause can get more traction, and you can get the Chinese attitude to change? Are you hopeful with the change in geopolitical sentiment, Ms. Holkar, over the last year?
Oh, well, Uday, I'm an activist. I'm a freedom activist, so I'm always hopeful about the freedom movement. I believe that the Tibetans inside Tibet, particularly, they are putting their lives on thread with the hope that things can change, and there's a huge amount of hope that Tibetans inside Tibet have placed in us, Tibetans in the free world, and to the leadership and the civil communities around the world. And I believe that now the international communities must know that the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government under the leadership of Xi Jinping, is not just an imperialist dictatorial regime that has brought an intensive repression against the Tibetans and the other occupied nations like East Turkestan and South Mongolian, but the free nations around the world, they are equally threatened by the Chinese Communist Party. So I would say that instead of us seeking support from these nations, I want to always change the language and say that now is the time when the free nations must become allies, our allies, because we are the biggest evidence of the brutality and the repression that China is capable of. Now the world knows. Now the world knows right now that the increasing number of deaths that we are hearing around the world, we know that everything has come into the picture because of Chinese Communist Party and their lack of willingness to acknowledge and to accept their mistake, and in fact throw the responsibility on other nations, is an evidence that now the world must come together and question China. And to be able to do that, we must go back in history. And to do that, I would say that Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolian are the best allies that the free countries can find. And now the world must come together and come up with policies and reciprocity policies to let China know that it is enough. And as you said earlier, Uday, enough is enough, and we're not going to take it. So yes, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that with the pressure from the civil communities, international civil communities, now the leadership and the United Nations will finally, and for the last, speak up against China and hold China accountable.
The world has taken note of the Uyghur Muslim oppression. This issue has been talked about like never before in the last year or 2 years, actually. But is that a situation that exists on ground in China as well? Do you believe there is discontent in Xinjiang and that is spreading to other parts of China, which has become a concern for Xi Jinping? Is that the sentiment that you're getting through your reports as well, Mr. Ilchi?
So it's very difficult to know exactly what's happening in China and in East Turkestan, just due to the nature of the environment, the oppressive regime, and the control of information that flows in or out. What we've seen is that there are people who recognize at the very least that the treatment of Uyghurs by the CCP is unjust. One of the biggest examples is a few months ago when the CCP called for a boycott of brands that had made statements on using cotton harvested from forced labor using Uyghurs. We saw that on, I believe, Weibo. There were people who said, instead of supporting, Xinjiang cotton, we should be supporting the people. We should be supporting Uyghurs. Of course, those comments were removed almost instantly. So I think what we're seeing is that there are people who are aware, but the vast majority either, don't know or are supportive of the CCP's policies and are left in the dark as to the reality of what the regime is doing to the Uyghurs.
Okay, Mr. Togochog, coming quickly across to you at this point, it's not just now the people of Mongolia who are alone in this fight. It's not just the people in Tibet who are alone now. The world is joining in, and do you believe now that this has become a multi-pronged war against China, with what's happened in Hong Kong, what's happened in Mongolia, what's happened in Tibet, what's happened in Xinjiang, what's happened in Wuhan as well now? The people of Wuhan are upset with the cover-up, the fact that they believe they don't really know whether it was lab-created or it came from the wet market, and why China didn't act earlier. Do you believe that this is a very different scenario today that China is facing, and perhaps popular sentiment as well will go with those against CCP in 2021, which is something that is becoming very concerning for the heads of government?
So, yes. Before I answer your question, I would like to come back to your earlier question. What had changed in China, both in positively or negatively. So in the past, since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, 32 years have passed, but yes, things have changed. At least there are two major changes. One, China is domestically increasingly violent, oppressive, and all dissent are crushed and within the borders of People's Republic of China. And internationally, China is increasingly becoming confident in promoting is ideology. And for example, there have been so many Confucius Institute and even in the free and democratic world, the Chinese Communist Party propaganda and brainwash is so flagrant, and so these are the two major chains, and mostly because partially thanks to the international community's inaction, especially the free world and including the United States failure to take action right after the 1989. We missed the opportunity, and the United States, as Dr. Teng Biao mentioned, the United States did not take action, but also immediately the few days after that, United States was actually closing the relationship with China again. So now the world is changing, especially after the pandemic. The whole world is realizing that this threat is real. This threat is unprecedented. Even in the United States, for example, there is a new committee established called Present Danger of China. So that's a committee on present danger of China. That is specifically for working to bring down the Chinese Communist regime. So yes, world is slowly waking up. It's not too late. Still, there is a chance for us to work together to solve this problem. This is not only the problem of just domestic violence, violation of human rights in within the borders of China. This is also a global hegemony, global problem. And then China is regionally it's a bully and bullying the neighbors, smaller countries, like for example independent country of Mongolia, Pakistan, and even Nepal and these countries. And also it's a threat to the neighboring larger countries like India or Japan. So it's increasingly harassing the borders of these countries. So yes, China is no longer it's just a small problem of the human rights violator, but it is a global problem that we need to deal with.
Oh. Well, Dr. Chen, we began with you. We'll give you the last word. Do you believe this is something that is unprecedented? The fact that what we're seeing now is that countries are not turning a blind eye. There have been airspace violations in Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, but the envoys are being summoned. Countermeasures are being taken. Taiwan, talking with the United States, China was upset. It made its angst clear. There were airspace violations, there were naval violations, there were maritime incursions. However, Taiwan has not backed down. So is this now a very different attitude that the Chinese are facing in that region, where countries are not now turning to aggressions by the Chinese anymore?
No. I think the world used to have a dream about China, that China will become better, will give their own people more freedom, will become more democratic as it gets richer. But I think the hope has been dashed by Xi Jinping himself. It's oppression on the Chinese pro-democracy movement. It's a military aggression against its neighbor. It's a repression of the Uyghur people, the Tibetan people, and the Southern Mongolian people. I think that all add up to a single and a very strong message that China, not China, but the CCP itself is very aggressive. It's very oppressive domestically, but it's very aggressive internationally. It lives out a dream, a so-called Xi Jinping called the China dream. The China dream is someday that China will dominate the world. I think gradually, the whole world have wake up to this China dream. They understand that China is some force to be expect, that will live peacefully with the rest of the world. And China is not no longer easy to make new friends. It used to be with its market size, with its some kind of pet up about China market. It can easily alert many people who are eager to seek money-making opportunities in China. But with the economic downturn, as well as the trade war with the U.S. and the rest of the world, and I think the expectation has now gone. I would say that there is a paradigm shift, and I think people of Taiwan, the Uyghur, the Tibetan, and the Southern Mongolian, and the Chinese activists, dissidents, and the Hong Kong activists used to sort of fight alone. We are the very few communities that understand the China threat. But I think gradually the world has understand the essence of the Chinese Communist Party under the leadership of Xi Jinping. It's not only a threat to its own people, it's a threat to the global order and the peace and stability. So we have to come back together to stand up to each other. We have to unite. The free-loving people have to unite. And I believe that there is some people in China eager and look to the outside world and expect that someday they might enjoy the freedom and the liberty like the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Let's certainly hope for that. Well, on that note, we thank all of our guests for joining us on this very special broadcast. And in conclusion, our thoughts and, of course, prayers are with the families of those affected by this massacre and, of course, the survivors as well. Let's take a break. Much more coming up on the other side on NewsX.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.